Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Minergy Full Year Results webinar. We'll be starting this session with a short video which will show you how the mine and the project has developed into a mining operation. There will be a short address by our independent non-executive chairperson, Mokoena Marulani, which will be followed by the CEO, Morné du Plessis, taking you through the operations of the business. The CFO, JP van Staden, will talk you through the numbers. In terms of housekeeping, please could you keep yourself on mute and your video off if you are struggling with bandwidth. And then please pop any questions you have into the Q&A box, and we will go through these at the end of the presentation. The results booklet should be available on the Minergy website. It's just been released via X News, and we will go through, and the video and the presentation will also be on the website at the end of this presentation to you. I hope that you now will enjoy the video.
Good morning and welcome all to the Minergy Results webinar. These are indeed unprecedented times, as this month marks effectively 6 months of COVID-19 related impediments on the way we conduct business. As you know, we usually meet you at a nice venue in Gaborone for the results presentation over a cup of tea. And we hope that we'll be able to revert back to this next year this time. Ladies and gentlemen, Minergy's story is one of achievement over a relatively short period of time in entrenching coal as a viable sector in support of the Botswana economy. I have personally been involved with Minergy from when it was a greenfield project back in 2017 and when various studies were still being conducted. This was followed by the listing of the company on the Botswana Stock Exchange in 2017 and the subsequent awarding of the mining license in 2018, and the commissioning of stage 1 of the washing plant in the current financial year. Reflecting, I can say this has been a journey of remarkable achievement made in a very short period of time. Our Chief Executive Officer, Morné du Plessis, will take you through the achievements, business progress, as well as the devastating effect of COVID-19 on our business, and our Chief Financial Officer, JP van Staden, will explain the effect on the numbers. The CEO will also take you through the significant headwinds that the company has faced over the reporting period, as well as the prognosis going forward. Despite this, I'm very proud of the way the team has handled this unique and unprecedented crisis, especially ensuring that our people remain safe, informed, and have all the necessary PPE and protocols to deal with the virus. We remain a strong employer of local people, as the video showed, and we also support the most vulnerable in surrounding communities through the establishment of the Minergy Coal Community Support Fund. Minergy remains committed to supporting the government of Botswana through job creation, skills development, training, as well as ensuring a thriving coal industry in the country. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to hand over to our management team to take you through the various presentations. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Ri'ale amogela pagaetsu. And for our Australian friends, welcome, mates. It's my privilege today to take you through the financial year ending June 2020, talking to you about what we've achieved during the year, challenges we faced, and what the future looks like. It is an unprecedented year, so everything will be discussed within context of that. So if we move to our first slide, one of the cornerstones that the business is built on is health and safety. It's not stressed enough in our day-to-day activities. The guys take it extremely seriously. And as a result of these protocols being adhered to, we are very pleased to announce that since inception, which is now more than 750 days, there's been no reportable health and safety incidents that's led to a lost time. We are very, very proud of that. And it's a function and testament to the way that the team has implemented protocols. In addition, we are also very pleased to announce that although we were allowed to operate as an essential service provider during the COVID period, there has been no positive cases of COVID-19 identified at the mine. Again, all the protocols have been put in place. This was spearheaded specifically by a COVID plan that was already rolled out at the inception of COVID, and we have been sticking very closely to that. This plan is available on our website for view, but this has also been shared with the Department of Mines, and they've used that actually as a template to roll out in the industry in Botswana. So very proud of that and very grateful that through the COVID period that we haven't been adversely affected by that. So as I said, no lost time due to injury. The graph basically shows you some property damage and some first aid cases which are very minimal on a day-to-day basis and a monthly basis. Thanks, Vanessa. Again, we operate around a small village called Medea. The community is extremely important to us. One of the biggest contributions that we believe we've made already is the switching on of electricity into the Medea village. This was already reported during the last financial year, but the consequences of that the beautiful benefits from that arising in the financial year is wonderful to observe. You'll see small little houses now having electricity. They've connected to the grid. We have switched on the power to the hotla in the clinic, and it's in our plans to switch electricity on at the school. I'm looking very much forward to the day when I see the faces of these little kids when a computer is switched on in school, lights and the like. So very exciting going forward to us, and very happy that we can be part of this growth. Remember, this village was only scheduled to get electricity in 2023, 2024. At the same time, during COVID-19, with a little bit of resources that we had available, we have decided to support the little Medea village. The COVID-19 has hit it significantly in the sense that they are really isolated, and the small little businesses that they may have there all shut down. People could not move from the village. In a collaborative effort between the company, the management team, and some of our major contractors, we've put some money together and we've purchased food parcels, and these food parcels were distributed to the village in 2 specific phases. The local Khosi Khabu was extremely grateful for us supporting his village. On the other hand, again, one of the promises that we've made our investors and our funders and the government of Botswana is that we will focus on making sure that employment is directed in empowering local Botswanans. You can see there from the graphic that 95% of our staff is all Botswana. You can also see that from 2018, we have increased our total labor force from 62 to 281. Just remember that when we go into a doubling up of capacity and putting in the second module, the projected employee rate will be 450 people. We've decided to show you before and after pictures. For you who haven't been to the mine, as a result of COVID-19 and so forth. Just some aerial photography on what the mine looked like last time. So a year ago, on the left-hand side, you'll see what we fondly call the cricket bat on the top of the screen, where there was basically just overburden removed. Now on the right-hand side, you can see the significant black pit where all the coal has been taken out of the box cut. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that we are moving towards the steady state direction. The area that I've highlighted for you there in a red square is what we call the ROM pad, where we will now tip the product that has been extracted from the mine, and that will be fed directly into the mine. Currently, by using the mobile solutions, we have to drive around that pit and dump it at a mobile solution, which creates extra cost. So there's a benefit for us, but I think the change is quite visibly seen here. Furthermore, just in terms of the washing plant, again, on the left-hand side, the picture last year, that is when we just commissioned the washing plant, very little area that's been disturbed. Here again, on the right-hand side in the red square, you can see the significant black coal that's in the whole area there, and specifically the stockpiles on the left-hand side of that square. Significant development, which we're very proud of. Very pleased to show you this overhead of our newest addition to our infrastructure fleet, which is our siding. Right at the bottom, the black rectangular shape there is where you would put your stockpiles, and the rail line is just at the bottom of that. And this is in what we call the triangle. These are the lines that go in and out of the Cherry Hill Strategic Fuel Depot rail line that's been built. It's not utilized, and in conjunction with our partners, Botswana Rail, we have implemented this siding, and as of July, we've already railed trains out of there. So in terms of the operational update for the financial year, it's been an unparalleled, unprecedented year. The year specifically for us has been broken up into two parts. The first 9 months, we were in a ramping up of mining operations. That included commissioning of what we call stage 1 of the coal handling and processing plant. Remember, in terms of commissioning of that, we've always had the strategy of putting mobile solutions for the front end crushing and for the back end of product screening in place so that we could capture the market. And then we would put in the rigid front end and back end, or the constructed parts of that going forward. So that was done successfully. We've moved product into South Africa, surprisingly into Namibia, which was not originally part of our plan, and Botswana as well. I've showed you the graphic of the rail siding, and at the end of the financial year, it was ready for transport of coal. We secured 150 million of debt funding from our funders, which is Botswana Development Corporation and the Minerals Development Company of Botswana. And we also did a debt to equity conversion for about 35 million. During the year as well, we said goodbye to our stalwart previous CEO, Andre Bauger. I took over, and in January, JP joined us as our CFO. So the team is now fully resourced and ready to take plans on. So this is until about the end of February. Yeah, by the last week of March, the dreaded COVID-19 that already started in December in China impacted everybody and everywhere in the world. We had about roughly 15 years of border closure. The 3 months represents about 25% of our financial year. If you put it into context, the first 3 months of the financial year, we used to, basically ramp up or get the commissioning of the plant ready, started sales in September. So we actually didn't have a full 3 months there. We had the middle 6 months, and then the last 3 months was decimated by COVID-19. The weakening of the South African rand had a significant impact on us. JP will elaborate on that. And we were fortunate to be classified as an essential service provider. But again, the customers that we supplied weren't that lucky or didn't make that categorization. And we could only supply to a qualifying 10% of our pre-COVID volume. So it's basically insignificant volumes. In terms of the year ahead, we've already seen significant upturn in our sales. There's been a relaxation of border restrictions, a recovery in the market, from the back end of July into August. In August, we recorded our highest sales to date. Again, to place it to you in context, if I take the sales volumes for July, August, and September, we are already at 55% of the 2020 sales volumes of about 198,000 tons. So already making significant inroads into our sales. What is planned for this year is the completion of stage 2 of our coal handling plant. Again, that is what we call the rigid front end, where we do not make use of mobile crushers and screens, and that will have significant benefits to us. We are in need of additional funding, and we'll talk about that. And then as a management team, we've set ourselves a 10-point business optimization plan that focuses on cost controls and efficiencies. If we look at the performance data for the financial year specifically, we look at the overburden that's been moved. It's about 1.3 million cubes. If you compare that to 2019, that number was nearly 2.4 million cubes. But you need to appreciate the state of development of the mine that was taking place at that time. So that's the one issue why it's lower, and from that perspective. Also in terms of COVID and the related scaling down, we didn't move as much overburden as we were allowed to. That's equated into about 445,000 tons of coal. And at the end of June 2019, I think we only extracted 25,000 tons of coal. So this is the coal extracted specifically out of the pit and presented to the plant. And from there, we sold about 198,000 tons of coal. The sales pricing that we achieved and the product mix that we achieved was not as we were targeting, but it is typical of the strategy we're following initially to capture and penetrate the target market. I've given you some insight into where we're selling our product to and what our product split is. For most of you, you'll be familiar with our product split of the finer product, which is the duff, the medium-sized product, which is our pea product and our most economical product, and then our nuts, which is the greater of the fractions. You'll see from here that if you take the 70% of the sales mix being attributed to duff, that will have a significant impact on your product mix and your sales pricing, specifically if it is the lower range of your sales pricing. So that is quite clear. That goes hand in hand with the segments into what it has been delivered into. The cement industry takes up 80% of the product for the financial year that's been reported in, and that includes the cement market of South Africa and Namibia. And then geographically, the surprise for us was the 22% component of our sales that's gone into Namibia. So very pleased with that. The other 78% is for South Africa. Botswana is represented as a 0 there, but it's actually 0.3%. So it's not like we sold nothing into there. Thank you. Let's just stand still for a moment and consider the COVID-19 effects. When we typically look at the results presentation, and when JP is going to show you the numbers now, the numbers will look quite scary in terms of a prior year. But again, I think we have to put our hats on and say, what is the effects of COVID-19 on each business? And everyone obviously experienced difficulty. Firstly, I believe COVID-19 doesn't discriminate any business. It's affected the Debswanas, Anglo Americans, and Minergie. So in terms of our business specifically, we weren't able to generate sales for 3 months. Now we were on the ramping up stage of our processes, and this is where we were starting to generate most of our sales. So you can imagine that the last 3 months of the year, which is 25% of the year, as I said, didn't realize into sales. That has a significant impact on cash generation. The target market, as I mentioned, was closed. The contract customer that we have called force majeure, and unfortunately, when the relaxation was announced from the beginning of June in South Africa, the startup of the South African industry was much slower than expected. So that was the first area that was affected. Secondly, what we call stage 2 of our plant was delayed as a result of COVID-19. It was supposed to start construction in April 2020. That could not proceed. It's a South African operation. And even if it was a Botswana operation, it would have been closed because the manufacturing workshops were closed. The outsourced parts that had to be ordered on long lead time items were also closed, for example, electrical components. And then to make it even worse, the funding of this construction for the boot operator was placed on hold until clarity was obtained with regard to the economic changes that will happen. Cross-border logistics affected us seriously. You must have understanding that we operate with 3 jurisdictions, different set of COVID-19 rules: Namibia, South Africa, and Botswana. At the same time, Botswana and South Africa has probably implemented the strictest of all COVID-19 lockdown rules worldwide. So it's been extremely difficult. So crossing trucks coming from South Africa normally do a 1-day turnaround and return to the customer. We have had lead times of 3 to 5 days for one load to go through. So it's been very disrupting. It's been disruptive for our customers, very difficult to provide a consistent supply. So where we're expecting 50 to 60 trucks a day at the mine, 10 would pitch up. That was all impacted by, the COVID-19 tests. They had to wait, the drivers had to wait for the results. In addition to that, there was the implementation of what we called escorted convoys. The trucks couldn't leave the border post. They had to wait for the police to convoy them into and to escort them into the specific areas that was allowable, and that you had to wait for an accumulation of trucks there. All of this culminates in very poor cash flow and a negative impact on profitability. We are, in terms of certain of our contracts, we are forced and obliged to still pay contractual fixed costs irrespective of that. We do not have the flexibility of force majeure in some of these contracts. And on the other hand, we also, in terms of Botswana legislation, we're not allowed to restructure the business down. All staff had to be kept in place. And I am happy to report that neither Minergie nor any of its contractors had retrenched anybody during this time. It does leave the companies with an enormous burden to pay those fixed costs. The disappointing thing that we found in terms of COVID relief packages is that there is unattainable commercial hurdles, specifically for a startup like ourselves. If you're not an established customer of a bank, or you haven't got a profitable history, then the commercial rules are still applied. We were hoping that that would not be the case, but unfortunately, these are still the criteria being applied, which is detrimental to a startup business. Thank you. Let's have a look at the industry. Again, most of you will know that we supply our coal into what we call the industrial market. On the top right-hand block graph gives you an indication of how the South African domestic market, I'm not talking about exports, are typically split up. 68% of that will go into power generation, which is your Eskom type of product. Your synthetic fuels is your Sasols. And then there's about 34 million tons of coal annually available and required by the South African domestic market. That's the market that we supply our size product into. On the left-hand top side, you'll see that this market over the last 4 years has shown a compounded annual growth rate of about 18%. Significant growth. Obviously, COVID-19 will decimate any statistics that has been built up over time, but the inherent and intrinsic value of this market remains for us. So on the demand side, we see that there's a growing demand for the size product. What's happening on the supply side? We know that South Africa, they produce about 240 million tons of coal per annum. That number has stagnated and is declining slowly. Why is that? Well, there's no new coal mines being developed. Yes, there's a lot of rhetoric about the big players moving out of South Africa. But remember, that coal is taken up by a junior mine or somebody else. So the coal still remains the same, but they're not opening new mines. They're just taking those mines over. We know that Eskom is facing a coal cliff. It's already happened. We'll speak about that a little bit later. We don't believe South Africa will allow the utility to fail. And the situation may and will occur where product from the domestic market from South African producer perspective will have to be channeled into Eskom to supply that need, which obviously opens up the market for us to fill that gap. Just looking in terms of what we see in terms of the international pricing and so forth. The thermal exports through Richards Bay is unfortunately tightening at the moment. There's some aggressive marketing campaigns going into the Mediterranean as there's a surging Indian demand for the steel industry, and everybody's trying to get the best transactions for them in the Kroby mode that they are at the moment. We have a phenomenon that affects our pricing, is where we've got weak API4 pricing or RBCT pricing, that it does put pressure on our pricing in the sense that the exporters channel their product into the domestic market, or the junior miners that normally typically supply into the exporters also now have to divert it back into the local market because the export price is not giving them profitable returns. So the export price went down from about $85 in February to a low of about $45 around late March, April. It's steadily been climbing up and growing. I see the latest forecast for November pricing ahead is over the $60. I believe $60 is a barrier for the pricing, and the fact that it's increased is a positive trend for us. On the other hand, we also hear news of mines and export mines stopping supply and going on to care and maintenance because of the weak markets. Now, those operations can obviously afford to go in care and maintenance, but it does open up the opportunity for us where that supply is taken out of the market to put into the market from our side. So from our perspective, we believe the domestic prices will remain under pressure for the last half of this year. There is small flickerings of hope, but we believe, and we've been conservatively looking at a stability in the pricing as where the levels are now. And then from the first half of 2021, there is an opportunity, and we believe that the markets will recover, specifically a push from the international market to withdraw product out of the domestic market, which again gives us the opportunity to supply into our market and allows better pricing for ourselves. Again, from a pricing perspective, we've shown this graph previously where you see the difference between the volatility of the API4, which is the blue up and down graphic, compared to the more stable brown line, which is the domestic pricing. However, this has been a trend that we can go back in time and was always there. COVID-19 has come along and knocked us out of the park. So you'll see the domestic pricing has also taken a knock. The domestic A-grade piece, which is one of the products that we would look into supply in that type of market, is 20% down from prices that was in place in March. So that pricing is even 40% below when it was in the highs in 2018. So we believe there's a significant upside on pricing as the market increases, as the market recovers, and people and industry wants to recover what was lost during COVID-19. There will be increased volumes, and that will give us an opportunity for pricing. The devastating weakening of the rand, which JP will talk about, has also had a negative effect on us converting it back to our on-mine pull-up price. I'm going to hand over to my colleague JP van Staden to take us through the financial numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Monet. Just waiting for the next slide to pop up there. I can't see it on my side yet.
JP, can you see the slide? Sorry to interrupt.
There we go. I can see it now. Thank you very much, Vanessa. And thanks, Monet. The results that I'm going to take you through will be typical of a junior miner that has been ramping up operations during a year that we faced COVID-19, as Monet has already spoken about. The other thing that's important to note is that a comparison of the 2020 financial year's results to the 2019 year is not practical on a like-for-like basis. And that's because of the various phases that our mine has moved through over the last 3 years. As you can see on the slide there, during our 2018 financial year, we were at the back end of our exploration and evaluation phase. And then in around August of 2018, when we got our mining license, we moved into the construction and development phase of the mine, which took us through to the end of the 2019 financial year. Early in the 2020 financial year, we commissioned the plant and started the production and sale phase of the mine, which as Mornay has already explained, had a sort of phase financial year with the ramping up activity, but also the impact of COVID-19. So trying to compare the years, which are very different in nature, is not going to be practical. Nonetheless, moving on to the income statement, show you the numbers there. You can see the 2020 financial year showing our first year of production and sales, and the costs that go with it. The other significant increase that you'll see there is our finance cost line as a result of the additional debt that we took on during the financial year. Although some of that finance cost was capitalized as part of our capital development activities, a lot of it still was expensed through the income statement. But let's focus on the big lines at the top, the new lines, the revenue and the cost of sales. Mornay's already spoken about the revenue of 98,000 tons during the year, and that the product mix that we had there was largely towards the Duff product, the finer product, which is also the lower priced product. Now that product mix had a negative impact on the overall price that we achieve. If you do the sums there and you divide the revenue by the tons, you'll see that our average price was running below the 400 pula per ton mark during this period. We need to focus on a better product mix going forward, which we will be able to achieve, and that will increase the average sales price. So the other thing that impacted on our sales prices, as Mornay alluded to, was the weakening of the South African rand. 99% of that 80 million revenue that you see there was denominated in foreign currency, not Botswana pula. Most of it in rand or Namibian dollar, which is the same as the South African rand, and that's all foreign currency that came into Botswana, but impacted once you convert it into pula by the rand. The rand ran very stably against the pula at levels of between 132 and 135 during the first 9 months of the financial year, but then South Africa got a credit rating downgrade towards the beginning of March, and we had the COVID-19 lockdown impact on the currency, altogether rapidly weakening the South African rand to levels above 150, which had a very negative impact on our average sales prices in that period. About 1.3 million in such a short period, last 3 months of the year, was the impact there. We've seen some strengthening again of the rand subsequent to that, and we're running now at levels of 145, and hopefully steadily we'll get back to the levels we saw in the previous year. The key question is, why were the costs so much higher than the revenue? You see 149, or call it almost 150 million pula there spent on cost of sales, and some of the key reasons there will be around the plant. We had a plant that, as Mornay mentioned, stage 1 of the plant was completed, but we were still running with mobile solutions on the crushing and screening front, which had an impact on the volumes that we were able to produce. It also had an impact on the product mix that we were able to produce, and in addition had an impact on the cost related to materials handling in driving and feeding product into the plant, rather than what we will have once the rigid front end and back ends are completed. When you add those together, the impact on our sales prices, as I've talked about, and the impact on costs and volumes, as I spoke about now, you end up with a situation where you're not recovering all your costs. We are targeting a level of around 600 or 60,000 tons per month to get to the break-even level, and that will be achievable as soon as our plant upgrades are completed and the market has recovered. We came very close to those levels of just over 50,000 tons in the month of August. But let me move to the next slide and unpack that big cost of sales number for you in a bit more detail. So you can see on the first donut graph there on the left that our cost of sales is made up of sort of three key areas: mining, beneficiation, and other. And not surprisingly, mining makes up the bulk of the costs that you see there, and that's typically your cost that the cost of blasting in the pit, hauling out the coal and the overburden, and the diesel that goes with it. That cost is almost all just from our mining contractor that's doing the mining work for us. So nothing unusual in there. The next point, or the next big section there, is the beneficiation cost, and I'll unpack that in the second donut graph in the middle of the page of the slide there, and you'll see that our beneficiation cost, 51% of it is made up of the subcontractor costs that we pay to the contractor who's running the washing plant for us. So it's purely the coal washing cost. The other portion, 44%, which is a significant proportion of the beneficiation cost, is the material handling cost. And as you'll recall, we said that that is a cost that was higher in this past period than what we expected to be going forward. Once the plant front end and back end has been upgraded and completed, the material handling cost will come down significantly, and there will be a saving in that going forward. But that's one of the areas that has caused the significant extra cost in the current year. The other section, which makes up 15% of the total cost of sales, is broken down on the right-hand side of this slide there, and you can see it's pretty evenly spread between things like transport, depreciation, employee costs and royalties, and then a few other things. The transport cost that you see there, it's about 6 million pula, which is matched with revenue of about 6 million pula, and that's just when some customers require or request that we deliver the product to their site. Then there's a transport cost involved with equal and opposite revenue that we recover from the customers. We don't make margin on the transport. The depreciation is obviously a new item that came in the current year. It's about 5 million pula in total, and this is the first year that we had operations, and obviously the depreciation of the mining assets coming through. Employee cost, pretty much a fixed cost that's there this year, and the royalties running at 3% of sales. Thanks. I'll move on to the statement of financial position, or the balance sheet as we used to call it in the old days. What you'll see there is also a significant change year on year in the balance sheet. You'll see that the property, plant and equipment line has more than doubled. Might be surprising for some people thinking that we're in the production phase. Why are we still adding so much to our property, plant and equipment? I'll break that down in the next slide shortly. Apart from the big change in the property, plant and equipment and the impact of the losses we spoke about in the income statement now, which has had an impact on the accumulated losses or the equity level, the other big change has been on the borrowings. So let me just run through some of the key lines there. On the inventory line, it might not look like a big change year on year. That number is broken down this year mainly between some work in progress, where we're in the process of exposing about 180,000 tons of coal, and then finished product, which represent about 55,000 tons of coal. In the prior year, there was no finished product in that number. The number was almost completely represented by work in progress. At that stage, we had closer to about 300,000 tons of coal that was in the process of being exposed. The reason that number's come down is because of the slowdown in operations in the last quarter of the financial year, when cash preservation was key during the COVID-19 lockdown periods, and therefore the pre-stripping activities slowing down and resulting in a lower number in the work in progress. Our trade and other receivables number this year includes trade receivables for the first time. It's a smallish number, 8.5 million of sales that had not yet been recovered at that point in time. It's all been received subsequent to year end, and the rest is basically a VAT receivable that was still outstanding at that point at the year end, but also recovered after the year end. The prior year actually showed a bigger trade and other receivables number, and the main reason for that was because we had a prepayment that was parked in there, which was an advance that we had paid to the contractor that was building the washing plant for us. And this year, when we actually brought portion of the washing plant into our books together with the liability. That prepayment or advance that was sitting there was reallocated to borrowings. So let's talk about borrowings next. And you'll see there was a big change in the borrowings. One of the changes, let's rather not say the biggest one, was the washing plant that I was talking about now. We commissioned the washing module of the plant, the stage 1, during July and August of 2019, and then in September started producing decent volumes and sales. So once we brought that washing plant into use, we capitalized about 66 million pula as a asset, and a reciprocal liability was created. So the advance that we had in trade and other receivables was about 12.5 million pula that we reallocated to be offset against the liability. So that gives us a net increase on the liability side of about 54 million before adding interest during the period. The other big movement in our liabilities was around new funding that we obtained. In the prior year, we had short-term borrowings that included 40 million from the Botswana Development Corporation. That was converted into a longer-term facility and increased from 40 million to 80 million in the current financial period, which was one of the first large bits of funding that we got during the year. In addition to that, the Mineral Development Company of Botswana, the MDCB, also advanced us 110 million. So those are the three big movements in the borrowings: the MDCB, the BDC, and the washing plant liability. The other liability that you see increasing is the rehabilitation liability. That was reassessed at the end of the year. You've seen in the earlier slides that Mornay showed on the before and after pictures how the footprint on the mine has increased significantly. The pit is bigger and deeper, and that together with a realignment of the estimation processes to evolving industry practices has resulted in a bigger liability being created, with the reciprocal rehabilitation asset making its way into the property, plant and equipment, which we'll talk about shortly. The trade and other payables is made up mostly of supplier accounts, service providers. Our top 5 service providers make up 85% of that balance, and that'll be our mining contractor, our washing plant contractor, the team that's doing the civils contracting work for the washing plant, the diesel service provider or diesel providers, and also the transporters that are transporting some of the coal for us. Before I move on to the next slide, just quickly to mention, you see a 35 million increase in our stated capital. Mornay alluded to in one of his earlier slides, where some debt from one of our suppliers, one of our key suppliers, converted some of their vendor finance into equity during the year, and that boosted the working capital, or the share capital, sorry, by about 35 million. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see that we unpack there the capital expenditure during the year, which is obviously the increase in the property, plant and equipment during on the balance sheet. Now you'll see not everything that we capitalized on the balance sheet was actually of a cash nature. So I'm showing you both there, what we've capitalized versus what we've actually paid for in cash, and therefore what you'll see in the cash flow statement. First item I've already spoken about is the washing plant. When we brought that into use, we capitalized the cost related to that portion that we were already using. Once the rest of the plant that we've spoken about, the stage 2 upgrades for the rigid front and back end, and the filter press and fines dewatering circuits that are being constructed as we speak, once those are completed, this number will increase, and so will the related liability that goes with it. So there was this did not result in a cash outflow at this stage, because we haven't started paying for this plant yet, and therefore just a liability was created and therefore shown as a non-cash item. I've also spoken about the environmental rehabilitation liability that's increased by about 46 million pula. That created a reciprocal asset on the asset side, which is increased on the balance sheet. It's also of a non-cash nature, and those two together, as you can see there, just over 110 million of the total movement during the year. We capitalized some interest during the year because there were certain parts of the mine that were still under development, mainly the box cut. Although the box cut was big enough to start extracting coal at the beginning of the financial year, we still needed to complete certain box cut development activities during the year, and therefore that remained as one of the largest items that were still under construction during the year, whilst at the same time also extracting coal out of it. The box cut development you see as the next item there. Spoken about, that was one of the biggest cash outflows that we had in the current year. The other thing that impacted our income statement or our balance sheet this year is the adoption of the new accounting standard, IFRS 16. And just for most of you will know that what that standard requires is that all leased assets are shown as assets on the balance sheet with a reciprocal liability attached to it. In the past, operating leases or rentals would just be expensed through the income statement on a monthly basis. Now the standard requires us to create an asset and a liability. The asset gets depreciated and the liability has interest that goes through the income statement, and the lease payments reduce the liability. That was 10 million. About 8 million of that 10 million was at adoption on the first day of the financial year, and another 2 million related to new leases that were entered into during the year. The rail siding, Morné mentioned as well, very proud of the fact that we were able to complete the first phase of the rail siding. We now have operational rail siding, and the cost attached to that was about 9.1 million. We've received assistance with the funding of that from Botswana Railways, as Morné has explained. Water reticulation was a key item. The water is key for the plant and also for dust suppression. There was quite a bit of capex that went into that. The civils work related to support of the upgrades on the washing plant, 7.5 million there, and then various other small items. So that gives you in total the 177 million movement on the balance sheet, and about 40 million of that actually in cash. The next slide breaks down how we've funded this business to date. Now you'll see on the top of the slide there that in the early stages, when we were still an exploration and evaluation company and in early development, all the funding, as is common for junior mining companies, came from equity. We've continued raising equity even subsequent to the development of the mine and going into the production phase, but we've also introduced a significant amount of debt in the last financial year. In 2019, it was a smaller amount, it was about 40 to 45 million that came in during the 2019 financial year, and then significantly more in the current financial year, leaving us at the end of the financial year with a debt equity split of about 61% being debt and close to 40% being equity. When you break down the borrowings, you'll see the big items that I mentioned when we talked about the balance sheet earlier, being the BDC preference share debt that we've got there, that's about 80 million pula, the MDCB debentures, that is about 110 million pula, and then the liability that we've raised for the beneficiation plant, a boot contract, that's sitting at around 60 million. And that makes up the main portions of the borrowing. There's a small advance that we received from BotRail to help with the siding, and then the rest is really just the liabilities that we raised when we adopted IFRS 16. Moving on to the cash flow statement, I think we've covered most of it, but and I don't think you'll see any surprises here based on what I previously said. The large costs and that you've seen going through the income statement was about 170 million in cash that needed to be funded. That was partially funded by the revenue that we generated. Of the 80 million, 72 million of the 80 million revenue that we show in the income statement, 72 million of it was received in cash by the end of the financial year and partly funded all these costs. The rest was funded through borrowings, and we've talked about the additional borrowings that you see that you've seen on the balance sheet. We've spoken about the additions to fixed assets, the close to 40 million cash outflow there when we looked at the capex slide earlier. And then the additional borrowings of 146 million that you see there is mainly the 110 million from the MDCB, the extra 40 million from the BDC, about 5 million from BotRail, and then netted off against that is some repayments that we made during the year to give you the number that you see there. So year on year, the cash position improving marginally to complete the cash flow picture. I think on my final slide there, we'll just talk about, in summary, where this leaves us from a liquidity perspective is, as you will have seen from our financials, from our balance sheet, the current liabilities do currently still exceed our current assets. by about 14 million at this point. In the prior year, it was a bigger number of 74 million. We've converted a lot of debt from short-term into longer-term debt now. But the total assets do still exceed our total liabilities by 43 million pula, based on balance sheet values, which is lower than the prior year of 84 million, and that's mainly because of the losses that came through in the current year. The slower than planned operational ramp up to the steady state levels has created working capital shortfalls, and therefore additional debt is being pursued through a combination of debt and equity. We've submitted applications for additional debt funding to a number of potential funders, and we're in advanced discussions on that front. And from an equity raise perspective, that will need to follow the usual process of preparing circulars to shareholders for approval and then fundraising, which is normally at least a 3-month process, but that has also kicked off in the background. I think that concludes the breakdown of the financial numbers. I'll hand back to Morné. Thank you.
Thank you, JP, for that sobering analysis. I think just for the audience, it's important to understand the numbers in context of a junior miner starting up its operations. One of the most critical elements for that would be to have operations sustainably grow going into the future, and any momentum that you build up must be maintained. So we're in the unfortunate position where we started building up momentum, and then it got decimated by COVID-19 in the back end. I call it the perfect storm. Not what a startup business wants in their first year of operation, but please look at it in the context of that. If we look at the future focus, and what do we see looking forward, despite all the negativity of COVID-19, the depressed markets, we believe that we'll follow a return to profitability in steady state. And why do we say that? The following items, I believe, support that. We do believe we've got favorable government support. At the end of June, we had a visit by the Minister of Mines and Minister of Transport to our mine and to our siding. Very impressed with what we achieved in a very short space of time. One of the comments that one of the ministers made was that they were happy to see that there's at least a company out there that's doing something with their shareholders' money. I didn't want to comment on that specifically, but we were pleased that we could tick that box. We do have open doors and communication with them. It's very important for us to have that. So we're thankful for that. We also had the launch of our train in the beginning of July, and it was attended by the Minister of Transport, Minister of Infrastructure, Deputy Minister of Education. Very well supported, very well received, and very excited about the future and that what Minergie can bring to the Botswana industry, not just on the coal industry, but assisting with logistics and employment creation. We believe that historically we've been successful in raising funding from a debt and an equity perspective, and we'll do that. The business does need it, and it's required. It's inevitable from a COVID-19 situation that a business that's not well endowed with cash reserves will have to find additional funding. So we're quite confident on that. JP referred to the record sales in excess of 50,000 tons achieved in August. We're very pleased of that. The completion of the plant is very important to us. We will be in a position to operate at nameplate capacity, and that's very important specifically for us from a half year 2021 perspective. In terms of targets that we set ourselves for the remainder of the financial year, we're trying to achieve saleable coal of about 50,000 tons per month, and that's what we have achieved, for example, in August. The main reason for that is it's basically just scaled to what the market is demanding from us at the moment. It doesn't help us producing much more coal and creating much more cost, and the product won't get sold. So we believe that there's a delay in the market recovering, as I've mentioned earlier. So that's why we're targeting that number. However, from the 1st of January or first half of 2021, we believe that capacity on a saleable perspective will go up to 80,000 ton. We know we have the orders for those, and the markets have already been identified. The positive that we also already start seeing happening is that there is a slight recovery in the export price, which is good signs. that will filter down into the domestic pricing. Again, we've been very conservative with our outlook on pricing for the last half of this year, and there will be increases going forward. I've mentioned to you that it's probably running about 20% lower than the pre-COVID pricing, so we're happy to see those come through. We've spoken about the demand in the South African and the Namibian industries that consistently require sized coal. Minergy has captured that market and will continue delivering into that. We have Eskom supply potential, which I'll speak about shortly. The rail siding is a game changer for us in the sense that, firstly, it takes trucks off the road. A normal rail consignment normally is about 50 wagons. That equates to about 70 road trucks. With all the difficulties we're experiencing around border crossings and so forth, you can imagine that one train driver with these 50 wagons goes through the border with no problem compared to 70 drivers that's got to do a COVID test, wait for an escort, and so forth. So that's the way to go. It's been favorably received in the market. Again, rail is always dependent on our customer having similar facilities to enable the offloading. So it's not a across-the-board change that can be implemented, but there is enough customers out there that have access to rail. And then I've mentioned our business optimization efficiencies in our plan. Just in summary again, we're planning stage 2 to be completed on the plant. Then we're going to steady state production. We want to increase our cash flows so that we don't have to incur additional debt. We're still planning to list on AIM or a similar exchange. And then we want to double our capacity in 2022. Just in terms of AIM, I think it's important that the process was started. It was favorably received. The process was hampered significantly by Brexit. And then as soon as Brexit got resolved, COVID-19 appeared, which took all appetite for any investment out of the equation. So we believe there is still appetite for that. It will happen probably in the next financial year later. Thanks. I just wanted to share with you, through this doom and gloom, that there is some significant blue sky opportunities for Minergy, and it's more than blue sky. You all should be aware of the fact that Eskom has put out a request for a proposal for coal to all its power stations, or most of them. We specifically applied and submitted a request for proposal for one specifically for what was called the Tutuka power station. And in the Tutuka power station, they want 100 million tons of coal over 20 years. So that is a significant amount of coal. We can't provide all of that, but we can provide a significant amount into that. We have submitted a tender to that last year, November. Unfortunately, there's a 60-week adjudication period. I know it sounds crazy, but that is what it is. So we are expecting adjudication early in Q1 2021. But why is that a game changer for Minergy? Well, firstly, if you look at the RFP, the normal criteria that Eskom puts into the tenders, the RFPs, have got very limiting criteria, and only certain categories of industry or businesses can participate. We're all familiar with that in South Africa. In this specific tender, 90% of the qualifying criteria is price. The other 10% is all kinds of other paraphernalia. So it makes it an economical decision, not anything else. So that's number one. The fact that it was opened up for cross-border tendering or submission, that's brand new. I don't know my history if I've ever heard of Eskom asking their neighbors to provide coal into their power station. We know Eskom haven't got enough coal. It's significantly short. It's in the news every day. What favors us is that the Tutuka station will take coal by rail, which make our rail siding perfectly situated for that and evacuating on that basis, because for the volumes that we're targeting, you're going to have to do it by rail. There won't be enough road trucks to carry that amount of coal. We have a specific resource, or our resource that's included in our mining license at the moment. We'll just open up another box cut, a new mine will be opened. The infrastructure for an Eskom type of mine is much lower than the size product that we're chasing at the moment. It's more a crushing and a destoning exercise. So you have a lower capital cost. The cost to run that mine is lower, so your margins are better. We're also proud to say, and I believe that is fact, is that Minergie is the only Botswana producing coal mine to have tendered for this. So when it's going to be awarded, because I am positive about it, we will be the first Botswana mine, probably SADC mine, that will supply coal into Eskom. So we are very, very excited about it and look forward to a positive response on that quite soon. The last opportunity that we have, Vanessa, thank you, is the RBCT or the rail export opportunities. Everybody's aware of Mamabula Lepalale export line. It's quite in the news here in Botswana. The government is supporting it. Botswana Rail has put it as one of their projects that they want to achieve. Remember, it takes out 550 kilometers out of the logistics loop for a Botswana mine like ourselves. That makes us competitive at a much lower export price than currently is the case. We know that funding is being secured for that. It may be 3 or 4 years from now into construction and completion, but that is something that's definitely being pursued, and that is an additional blue sky for us. Again, on the South African side, they are already gearing up to have additional capacity on the line. The Lepalale Ermelo line has been upgraded, so they put an additional 6 million tons capacity on that line by the end of this year, and then another 4 million will be put onto that line by the end of 22. So there's an extra 10 million of tons of coal that will be put onto or there's a capacity for that. We know that in South Africa, they're not opening up new mines. So where's the coal going to come from? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, it's going to come from Botswana, and that's why the coal industry in Botswana has got a great opportunity to start activating their resources and make use of that in the future. Before I finish off, it's just our thank you slide. There's a few thank yous I want to say. Firstly, I want to thank Father God for giving us this asset, giving us this management team, the funding that we've received, and then also that we've survived COVID without any incidences. Many people have lost lives, and so we're very grateful to him for that. I thank my board for their support during this time. My management team, yes, guys, I know you're sitting there in the office in Pakalani. My heart is with you. I wish I could sit there by you, but I've never seen a team that's as ingenious as this one, that makes do with nothing and commits to everything. So my heartfelt thanks to them and what they achieved, from everybody, from our managing director, Al Martin, our own Gossi, to Al Kingsley, the guy that's driving the Weybridge. Fantastic people, guys. Big kudos to you all. I want to thank our funders, MDCB, BDC. You have stood out in the funding fraternity for backing a coal mine, number one. So we're thankful for that. And you're supporting the coal industry in Botswana, and your investment will be vindicated. I want to thank our service providers. We work very closely with them. Thank you very much to them, especially our open cast mining contractor, Jarkon. Igor, thank you for your support. Thanks to guys like Louis and Vic that's fighting in the trenches and in the pit. Very much appreciated. And then lastly, I just wanted to thank our customers for their loyal support and showing that Botswana coal is accepted. Pula.
Thank you so much, Monet and JP, for giving us that feedback. There are currently 13 questions in the queue, so I'm simply going to start at the top. I'm going to read the question out, and then if you guys can respond, please. So the first question is from Anonymous. In the unfortunate event that there were one or more of your employees that tested positive from COVID, what will be your response strategy? Will you shut down operations? If so, what will be the impact on production and the revenue earning potential?
Thank you for the question. I think firstly we need to understand that the mining environment and the mining site that we operate on have many isolated pockets. So we don't have a situation like an underground mine where the staff is on top of each other and all over the show. So we've got the washing plant guys working, and then there's a truck driver, number one. Number two, one of the protocols that we put in place is to specifically not allow a driver or a customer collecting coals driver to disembark from their vehicle. That is proven to be a very successful strategy. we've had an incident where there was fear of a positive testing on a driver. There was an immediate response by the health authorities, contact tracing, and so forth. So we do not foresee that something like this will happen. But in the event that it does happen, we have got significant COVID-19 protocols in place, evacuations, the clinics are on standby, and so forth. So we do not believe that because of the widespread disbursement of the staff, that it will shut down mining operations. It may be a separate part of it, but generally speaking, we believe in terms of the protocols, the screening, and the management of the truck drivers, that we've really managed that well. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Morne. Second question. In a perfect world, what would a restructure of the mine look like? How many people will be laid off? And what would the cost implications of the restructure be?
Well, it would look terribly. We're not thinking down those lines. You know, I think the important point to note here is that before any restructure is considered, we need to consider the impact on our target market or the customer market that we've secured. Any restructuring or any care and maintenance or any slowdown of activities will have a significant impact on the market that we've captured. You only have one chance to capture customers in the market that we are. It's very competitive, and one will have to be very clear and have a very good strategy to make sure that whatever the restructure looks like, is that you're going to be able to gain your target market back. Because remember, we are taking coal away from South African producers from another country and putting it back into South Africa. If there's a disappointment on this side or it doesn't come to fruition, South Africans will revert back into the South African specific supply. So hopefully that's not an issue for us. How many people will be laid off? Significant amount of people. You will probably see 1% of the people in terms of what is employed at the moment having to be in place to just fulfill health and safety purposes and so forth. So it's a terrible situation that we wouldn't want to look at this stage.
Thank you, Morne. The next question, when will the washing plant upgrade be completed?
We're expecting it to complete it in Q4 2020. I know it's a bit of a vague answer, but the upgrade includes many facets. The one is the front end, which will be completed earlier. There is improvements in terms of water-saving infrastructure that we're installing that will also be completed, but that will be later in the quarter.
Thank you. The next question is, are you able to quantify the impact of COVID-19 in Botswana Pula?
Choose a number. You can choose a number. Firstly, I don't think that it's a finite answer. The answer is still accumulating. We haven't seen the end of COVID-19. So whatever number I'm going to give to you, it will just accumulate. But in terms of a top of my head number, I will look at lost sales, and it's more than 50 million pula.
Thank you, Morne. JP, this might be a question for you. Can any of the long-term debt be converted to equity?
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. The debt that we have from the MDCB and the BDC, both of those facilities, the 110 from MDCB and the 80 million from BDC, both of those facilities have conversion options that have been built into them. Those two facilities run with a 6-year term. So at any time during the 6 years, there's no repayment on any of those loans during the 6 years, except for interest that we start servicing from the first quarter of 2021. So by the end of March, we start servicing that debt through paying the quarterly interest, but the actual capital repayment is delayed up until the end, and both the MDCB and BDC have options to convert.
Thank you, JP. The next question is from Tsegofatso saying, good morning. Please could you decompose the capitalized interest by funding line?
Yeah, I'll take that as well. Thanks, Vanessa. There isn't a breakdown of the capitalized interest by funding. Our total funding and interest or finance cost has been assessed, and a portion of that has been capitalized into capital expenditure, but it's not on a line by line, but it's not broken down on a line by line basis. We manage it as a pool.
Thanks, JP. Another question from Tsegofatso is saying, what is the total funding required to get the company to steady state production?
I'll take that, JP. So, Tsegofatso, I ask you for no difficult questions. So, firstly, I think that we will make it public quite shortly in terms of what we require in terms of a capital raise. Circulars will be circulated, and in terms of debt funding, what we're looking for that. So, for the timing, because we are at difficult stages of negotiation, I don't want to disclose those numbers, but they are substantial.
Thank you, Mornay. The next question is also from Anonymous, and I think you might have answered it. I'll read it out anyway for everyone to hear. Over the next 12 to 18 months, what are your funding needs? How much do you need? What is the split between debt and equity? What does your ideal debt to equity split look like? And are you going to be using convertible bonds versus bank borrowings?
Yeah, so in essence, don't want to give the quantum of the funding out at the moment. Typically, we are looking at a 50-50 split of debt equity in terms of raising the new debt. Whatever we can get from a debt perspective, we want to cover that in terms of equity as well. So, I'll answer it along those lines. Are we going to be using convertible bonds versus bank borrowings? Bank borrowings is not available to a junior miner, any normal financial institution that is not, into, let's say, for example, the development of the country, and just normal commercial banking won't even look at a startup mine like ourselves. So they look at you in 3 years' time when you've made profit, and they'll offer you facilities.
Thank you, Mornay. We have a question from Lume saying, morning, I wanted to get an idea of what the current level of stockpiles are and what the volume of recorded sales were in August.
Lume, morning to you. Thank you for the question. So the record sales in August was 53,000 tons. If we had more days in August, we would have delivered more because we had more orders than that. If you ask about what is the level of our current stockpiles, they are all depleted at the moment, as we are working on limited constraints at the moment until we get our funding released. So we are facing challenges in the months of September and October.
Thank you, Mornay. There's a question from Melissa saying, hello team. Firstly, well done on the tremendous work achieved during this financial year. My questions are as follows. I note that the boot funding was put on hold until the economy recovers. Please elaborate on this. Please elaborate. Has this funding been received? Do you believe that the company will be able to start servicing its debt facilities when they fall due? And lastly, what is the estimated normalized COS, cost of sales, once the front and back end crushers have been completed?
Morning, Melissa. Thank you for the question. Firstly, I can confirm that the boot funding was received. There's no holds on that anymore. The construction of the front end has commenced already. So when you visit the site, you'll see significant change. The front end was about 60% completed prior to COVID, so they need to complete all of that. So we're happy that that is a tick that we can leave behind us. Yes, will we be able to start servicing our debt? That's a very, very difficult question, and it's a trick question from you because you know that I'm supposed to do that, so I'm not going to answer it. And then lastly, in terms of the cost of sales, I think JP's graphical donut shows you the breakdown of the beneficiation cost. That 44% that was attributable to material handling cost is significantly going to be decreased. And that will then give you a better split of what it should look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mornay and JP. So that concludes the questions. I did say there were about 13 questions. What I realized is there are a couple of repeated questions, so maybe it was just people trying to get them through. So I haven't mentioned those. And I think that concludes the presentation, unless there are any more questions, but I don't see any coming through. So Mokoena, Monet, JP, thank you very much for taking us through all the information that I hope the market needs for this. And if there are no other concluding remarks, I think we can end the webinar.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you everyone for dialing in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.